Hello, and welcome to our webinar. We are joined by a very, very special guest, David Blank, but we'll introduce him in just a moment. And also Rachel Walker, one of our amazing members of our team. For all those just joining us, it's absolutely lovely to have you with us today. Thank you so much for offering to spend your lunchtime with us. Hopefully you've got something nice and nutritious to eat. And you're really sort of prepared to do a little bit of learning. Now, if you're like me, one of the things, we tend to just run around, particularly on Mondays, from meeting to another meeting, jumping in and out of calls and email, and probably a little bit stressful. And one of the things that we like to really think about at Coteam is just taking a moment for ourselves to really focus on things and to make sure we're really in the right mode. So I'm going to invite you, before we get into things, just to step away from your computer, put your hands down on your lap. Yeah, just take a moment, close your notifications if you need to, push your lunch to one side, and we're going to do just a tiny little bit of desk yoga, just a little stretch to really get us in the mood for this Monday afternoon that we're about to embrace on. And it's straightforward. I'm going to sort of do it with you, but I encourage you to follow along. Again, this is just an opportunity to have a good stretch. So first things first, I'm going to ask you to put both your hands out in front of you, like so. Interlace your fingers if possible, extend your arms and just hold that for about 8 seconds. Holding, stretch the back, release everything that's there. Breathing, slow down your breathing nice and slow, and release. Brilliant. And then I'm going to ask you to stretch up nice and high in the air, stretching out all those muscles. You might want to rock a little bit from side to side to stretch out the core, the center of the core. Brilliant. Great. Now we're going to do another little stretch. We're going to wrap our arms behind our head like so. Yep, grab hold of your opposite elbows. Again, just lean to your left and hold that for a few seconds. Brilliant. And then lean over to the right. Hold that for a few seconds. Great stuff. And then our last stretch, I'm going to ask you just to twist quite carefully. Twist your back. Put one arm on the back of your chest. Start with your right arm. Looking over your shoulder. Again, just opening up the chest. Gazing into the distance. Holding for a few seconds. Release. And then reaching back over the other shoulder, over your left shoulder, looking back. Hold it for a few seconds again and release. Brilliant. Hopefully that just nice little stretch gets us in the mood and ready to learn. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome a very special guest today, Mr. David Blank. David, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for that warming up as well. Really great to be here. I work as a learning program lead at Agile Business Tech, and I've been having different HR roles and also worked as a consultant for some years. And my background, I'm a trained psychologist and also have a degree in economics. And I'm going to share some of our experiences from working with supporting an organizational change with learning. And also what is the psychology behind learning. So I just want to say right at the start that this was very much a team effort. So everything I share here is sort of coming together from a lot of work that we did together in the organization. So a lot of people contributed to this. And we also had some great partners, including sort of privileged to work with you, Nick, and your colleagues at Coteam. So what was the problem? Well, as many companies, we are challenged with rapid changes in the world and technology, quick technology development. So there was a big organizational change happening around 1 year ago. And the driver behind that was to create an organization that could be faster and use technology in a better way that would ultimately come to the customers, to improve the customer experience. I'm not going to go into that anymore. I think all of you are here today know what I'm talking about. But how could we support this from a learning perspective? And to illustrate the change, there is an organizational chart here. And one way to put this change is to say that we went from a pretty traditional IT organization with hierarchies, departments, and so on, waterfall methods to a more agile way of working, and we also wanted to put product teams at the center. And this was a big change, of course, and several departments or several parts of the organization coming together to form this new entity. And everybody got new roles. So big challenge. So what we did was we invited around 1,000 persons on what we call learning journeys to ultimately become confident in their new roles. So this sort of organizational picture here is one part of the change. But we also had some culture to work with. And if you take the next slide, Nick, some of this is built on working in an agile context, I think. Some of this is coming from H&M values. But this gives a little bit the feeling of what kind of organization we were trying to create. We thought that psychological safety was very important, that everybody should feel safe to speak up at any time. Collaboration was key, especially maybe in a sort of team-centered organization where hierarchies shouldn't be so important. Learning and growth was actually put as quite important for everyone. And last but not least, we also talked about the importance of leadership, and that leadership is not something that only managers can do, but we see it as everyone can be a leader. So those were some kind of the sort of cultural building blocks, if you want, that we also had as a direction.
Brilliant. So David, I've worked with lots of organizations going through this type of transformation from the hierarchical sort of structures into something that is a little bit more agile. And I know from experience when people shift straight into sort of working in agile ways and running sprints and having backlogs and running the ceremonies of agile, often it can feel a lot like chaos. And it can be very difficult and challenging for people. So I'm particularly drawn to these 4 sort of guiding principles that you had there, particularly the first one, around psychological safety. And the willingness to experiment and to be able to speak up and not be afraid of failure. I guess I just want to just sense check with you quickly, this quest for psychological safety. I feel like every L&D person, every HR director I talk to now wants psychological safety in their teams. Do you have any thoughts just around that particular one?
It's a big area. We have worked, I think, hard on it with some success. I think key, of course, is to have the formal managers to understand how important they are to enable this, and also how easy it is for them to, maybe without the purpose of doing it, but can happen anyway, that they sort of take this psychological safety away by even small comments in a meeting room and so on. So it's easy to speak about this, but to really sort of understand what you can do to enable this and to drive this, it takes a bit of work with yourself, I think.
Of course, of course. So we are going to talk a little bit around the solution that, of course, you got to, David, and some of the guiding principles for that. We're going to give you lots of sort of hints and tips, and we've got a free tool also to offer up at the end of the session that will help you in terms of thinking about training efforts that you're doing and how impactful they can be. And we'll get to that in a moment. If there are any other questions as we're running through the session as well, you are more than welcome to use the Q&A button there on Zoom. We'll pick those up at the end of the session, David and I. But I want to take this all the way back. You come from a psychology background, David. I think it's really important to think about, before we even think about building training programs and how we run those training programs, it's really important to maybe bring it back to actually fundamentally, how do we learn? Because I think there's a lot of misnomers here that we tend to get caught up on.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if we want to design a learning solution, we should do it based on how we as humans learn. That way it will be more effective, I think. So what do we mean with learning? It's some kind of, you acquire some kind of knowledge or skill, you improve something you do. But really critical for us that works in organizations is, of course, you have to apply it, you have to use it. It's not enough that something sort of stays in your head. So learning at work for me is very much about changing behaviors, improving the way you do things. So change management and learning, sometimes it's not so easy for me to say what is what here. It kind of comes together. And if we take the next slide, there are kind of a couple of things I think are important. And excuse me if I'm preaching to the choir here, because it might seem obvious, but I still see it happening. The first point is that your brain is a computer is not true. We don't just change people by giving them lots of information and then we can expect them to process it in a logical way and then take the right decisions and change their behaviors at the right time. That's not how it works. The way it works is that we learn by practicing things, by being put in a safe environment where maybe we're given a little bit of guidance and are able to try out something new and see how that works, maybe have a positive experience, maybe get some more pointers from someone helping us, try again, maybe be even better at it, and so on. So gradual sort of improvement. And I mean, if we compare, let's look at learning in a completely different field. If we want to learn sports like swimming or tennis or golf or dancing, we're not interested in a long lecture, right? We want to have the opportunity to try it out and get some help on how we can improve that is specific and valuable for us, and then be able to try it again and gradually improve over time. So there is no reason to see learning at the workplace as different from that learning. And sometimes actually, if we tell too much, there is research indicating that can actually lead to more resistance. And that brings me to the third point here, that we often, I think, talk about change as always being hard. And I want to challenge that a little bit. And it's probably true that change is hard sometimes, but it's not always hard or difficult. And sometimes I guess we make it harder than it has to be. And as humans, we constantly change behaviors and learn new things, and we actually many times enjoy it, and we don't think of it as hard work. And if we are given the opportunity to have more freedom at work, or working in a way that is more effective, or with questions we like, and so on, then we're going to do that. Maybe it will take some conscious effort from our side, but we will enjoy it most of the time, and we will not see it as something hard, and the resistance will not be there. So my approach when there is a need for change or for learning is to see how can we make this something that doesn't feel like change in a way that is pushed on you, but something that you want to do, that makes life easier, or where you can do things in a more effective way. In that way, I think we can be better at creating a pull effect where people want to learn. So I mean, it's a field I've been working on in many years. It never becomes easy. Every situation is new. But I was a little bit frustrated of sort of traditional change management, and that actually took me to learn and study psychology to become a little better at doing this. And I really firmly believe now, both on my experiences and from research, that if we can create more pull than working with push, the change will be so much easier and effective.
It's funny you say that, David, because this idea of like pulling people into training, we talk a lot at Coteam around growth mindset and learning to learn. And you're 100% right. You know, like we don't like sitting at our desk doing the same thing day in, day out. We like to have autonomy. We like, mastery, like feeling that we're good at something. And these have been really critical drivers of learning, and starting to recognize this and the strive for continuous growth. I'm curious to hear just some of your further thoughts around sort of this idea of continuous growth and not just spray and pray type training efforts.
Yeah.
Of course, you said you were preaching to the choir here. We've got lots of other L&D people on this call. And it's interesting, I do still work with teams, I'm not going to name and shame here, that feel like if they just put some Agile coaches in, or if they just put people through an Agile, training program, that's actually going to solve the problem. Because they understand the mechanics of how to do Agile doesn't necessarily make an organization or a team become Agile. And many of you are probably working with similar taxonomies to this. This is a very loosely based on the sort of Bloom's approach to learning, but just helping people understand something is not actually going to drive real behavioral change. You actually need people to be able to apply that knowledge. And through that continued application where they can create things, they start to feel empowered and they start to feel a part of that movement as well. I wanted to bring this to life a little bit though. So just for a little bit of fun, we're going to do some puzzles right now, just to illustrate some of the points that David's spoken about. And I ask you to really pay attention. So if you've got anything else open, really focus on the screen for a moment, because I'm going to test your brain in a couple of different ways. And the first one of these puzzles is with a very simple memory game. So in a moment, I'm going to put about 20 items up on the screen. You're going to have 10 seconds to observe those items. Yeah, don't cheat. Just stare at the screen and try to observe the 20 items that are currently on the screen. Okay, I think that's enough time there. I've fed your brain with information. I've just sprayed information onto your brain. Now, very quickly, tell me in the chat, which of those items has disappeared? Can anyone tell me which item disappeared? No one coming through in the chat. Julie jumped in with the tablet bottle, which is not correct. Face mask. The face mask is indeed one of the items that has disappeared. It's not actually, it's sitting there. It is the lamp. Well done, Deza. One person out of, I don't know, the 40 or so that are on this call right now picked that item. So really good indication, again, like this idea of just throwing knowledge at someone and expecting them to grab onto things doesn't always work. Let's do another quick puzzle. I'm going to play an audio clip for you in a moment. I want you to listen very, very closely. It's time to silence everything around you and tell me if you hear a word. It's right in the center of the audio clip. I'll try to be as quiet as I possibly can, but listen very intently. Now, did anyone hear a word in there? So we're talking a little bit around sort of subjective bias and the way, again, our brain is quite a complex muscle. Thinking about this. You may have not heard anything. It might just sound like people contacting us from the other side. Now, I want you to stare very closely at your screen. I'm going to play exactly the same audio clip. Not faking this at all. Staring at your screen, tell me if you hear a word. Okay, did anyone hear the words green needle that time around? So again, the visual working with the audio to really create something that you hadn't expected. Let's do this one more time. Yeah. And again, I'm going to play exactly the same audio clip to you. And I want you to continue staring at the screen, not faking this at all. All right, who heard the word brainstorm that time? Witchcraft, says Niall there. So may have worked for some of you, maybe not for others, but this idea again, the the brain is quite complex. We need to think about what we learn and the stimulus that we give it, and think about the environment in which that stimulus is given as well, if we really want to create an effective transfer of learning. I'm actually going to talk a little bit now, and this is very much the basis. We're going to talk about specifically a program that H&M Group were running that we were part of as Coteam, where they were trying to enable some product owners. This is a massive piece of change that they're going through, creating this sort of this newly defined role and transitioning and hiring people into these sort of product thinking roles. And we're going to reference some research that was done by Grossman and Sales. So David, do you want to talk a little bit around this and some of the pillars that can really help guide our learning efforts? This is super valuable stuff. Like I said, we'll give you a checklist at the end that you can take away and use if you're designing a training program at the moment. David.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about some research and then show how we try to connect this to one of our learning journeys. But as you know, there's a lot of research on effectiveness of training out there, and these two articles summarize a lot of data and give very concrete sort of advice on how can we create trainings that are as effective as possible. And when we look at them, I think we'll see that it very much relates to what I talked about before, about how we as humans learn. So there are three pillars here: the characteristics of the participant, the design of the training, and the environment around the person that is taking part in the training. And I'm just going to, because of time, fly over this, but you might have a chance to look into this more in detail on your own, of course. So when it comes to the participant characteristics, there are several sort of aspects that are in a way internal to the person that will affect how effective the training is. The one that we focused on was the last one here, perceived utility of training. So if we could make the participants believe, and hopefully it was true, that this training would help them in some way, it would be useful for them, then we knew that they would be more engaged and take away more from the trainings. So that was one of the things we tried to create before the training even started.
Do you want to talk just a little bit, David, sort of around how you did that?
Yes. We had some help because we had done this large organizational change. And as I said in the beginning, basically everybody had new roles. And we said that we didn't expect anyone to be confident in their role from day one, but our expectation was more after 6 to 12 months that you would be proficient in your role. And to support everyone, we wanted to offer them some training. So we actually presented it as a help for them to be confident and master their roles. And I think that sort of helped everyone see the connection between the trainings and their own new role and their own new challenges.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And I definitely saw that from the outside as well. You know, people coming into the programs very enthused about the fact that they were not just developing necessarily professionally, but we were also giving them skills to develop in personal ways as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit more with the program that we ran together.
Yeah.
Training design.
Yes, exactly. And here there is a lot to think about when you design the training, of course. But just to highlight a couple here, learning objectives. By knowing what you try to achieve with the training and making that very explicit, I think we experienced that it really helped us by having that, to design the training. So with these learning objectives, what do we want to put in the training? So that's one part of the learning objectives. But the second part, and maybe that's even more important, is that then we could transfer a lot of the responsibility to the participant. We could say that here are the learning objectives, and we're going to give you some help, but ultimately it's up to you to try to reach those objectives. And the other one here is mixed delivery methods. So basically, the finding here from research is that just sort of lecturing is not going to be very successful when it comes to learning or changing anything. So you need maybe to have a little bit of lecturing, but you have to have a lot of behavior modeling and practice to create some kind of learning.
And that is so crucial, particularly challenging, I would say, given that you've gone through this transformation almost entirely during COVID, to be able to apply that. But I think we'll look at the design in a moment and see how you actually brought that to life.
Yeah. Then we have the third pillar, which is the work environment, or what do you come back to when you've done the training? And this is also hugely important to be able to take something away and apply it. So here we can highlight, for example, the opportunity to perform. So there has to be good timing. And this was something that we sometimes struggled with, that you take a training, learn something, and then it's crucial that you have an opportunity to try it out when you get back to your job. Sometimes we succeeded, and sometimes probably the timing was a little bit off, and then it didn't work so well, because you cannot just, again, it's not the hard drive where you can just store those learnings and then take them out a year later if your role changes in a new direction. So it has to be, you have to come back to work where you can actually practice what you learned. And I can build a little bit on that more if you switch to the next slide. Here is sort of an illustration of one of the learning journeys that we put together. And this was for a role that we call product owner. And that's an important role in our organization. They are ultimately responsible for what a team delivers. And it was, as I said, a new role. And this learning journey took around 6 to 12 months, a little bit depending on when you were starting in this transition that we went through. And one of the things we did, just to continue where I left off with the sort of work environment, is that we tried to, as much as possible, involve the managers of the persons that were going through a learning journey like this, so that they would be aware of what the participant, what their employees were learning. And we were trying to give them some suggestions on how they could then be helpful in giving the participant good, suitable tasks at work, and maybe challenging them a little bit to try to apply what they have learned, and so on. And again, to be honest here, I think we had a bit of mixed results. When we got the managers on board, it made, I think, a huge difference. But we also had some problems, and I think you can see that priorities and so on. And we also were struggling with the fact that everybody were in new roles. So a lot of the managers were also trying to sort of understand their new job and so on. So it wasn't always easy to get that kind of support, but when it worked, it really made a difference. And if I should highlight a couple of other things here, what you see is different sort of training modules that were spread out over time. But one thing that is, I think, important is skills assessment, that is on one of the lines there in the top. And what that means is that we asked the participants to assess their own skills against the learning objectives. We asked them to do it in the beginning, or even before the learning journey started, and then throughout. And in that way, we hoped to create kind of drive with them to see what areas did they need to improve in order to be proficient in their new role. And we actually made a conscious decision to not control that or do any kind of central follow-up. I guess that's an option you also you can do that, but we decided to instead focus all our energy from the L&D team on creating these learning journeys so that they would be so engaging and useful that the participants would go through them and get the most out of them. And we gave them responsibility to do their own self-assessment. We encouraged them to take input from people around them that knew them well.
There's quite a lot to take in here, so I just wanted to sort of open floor for questions. You're welcome to use the Q&A function if you like, or you can drop into the chat. Obviously, Q&A is anonymous. We actually have a question coming through. We'll pick these up at the end from Navjot there. We will get into these towards the end. But I think you can see, H&M Group, massive organization undergoing tremendous amounts of change. That is by no means, it's no mean feat to be able to go through that, but really placing, you mentioned before, the products and the customers at the center of the organization, but then also placing learning in the center of that transformation as well, and realizing, these things that you've spoken about, like how do we create the right environment for this? How do we make sure that we're designing training in an impactful and effectual way? And how do we ensure that the participants are on board with this and engaged in it? I think these are some really valuable takeaways that we would talk about here. Actually, this is a really good question from Olivia. I do want to pick this one up quickly. Any tips on how to engage managers when they're super busy and overwhelmed by their own workloads? I have my take on that, but I'd love to hear from you, David.
Okay, I'll start. I don't have a definite answer, unfortunately. I'm still looking. As I said, we had mixed success. I think one thing maybe we could do, if I would do this again, we would probably, in this case, maybe use the hierarchy in a way and try to create engagement all the way from the top. And try to involve the top management on what we are trying to do with these learning journeys and how they can support the managers below them. So again, trying to make it more concrete for them, what kind of how they can support by sort of maybe making sure there is enough time. If the question comes from the top, then if a manager gets a question from his or her manager, that will be more important than if it just comes from the L&D team.
This also ties a little bit in actually with Navjot's question earlier, which is, waiting for agility to happen bottom up is one thing, that sort of grassroots approach, but it also needs to be driven top down. Those two need to work in tandem for organizational change to take place. And Navjot just asked here sort of the 3-4 benefits that you've seen of agility. By enabling this, what are the main benefits that H&M Group are seeking to achieve?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if the question is about agility or learning objectives in general.
I think it's more around this idea of agility. So recognizing you needed to change, but what are some of the inherent benefits that have come from this change?
Well, on an organizational level, I think the idea is to make us faster and more close to the market, to the customer, and be able to react quicker. And that's very much the kind of culture we are trying to create here. Yeah.
Speed to market being another one, maneuverability and adaptability.
Yeah.
Being able to, test and learn. We have another great question here from Maida. We'll pick this one up and then we'll save some more Q&A for the end. But how do you manage what the participants think they know and what they actually know?
Yeah.
There's a self-assessment. So.
Yeah, that's a good question because we have this problem with what do you call that? Unconscious
bias. Yeah.
Unconscious bias, and also it's easy to estimate your own ability when you don't have enough skill in an area. So there is no easy way to do that. Maybe depending on what, in some cases we have more like formal tests that you could do as a participant to as part of an e-learning program, for example, where you could assess yourself based on skills. And I think that's a good way to do it when it's possible to have it a little bit more formal. But I think what we were trying to do here is maybe realize that, okay, maybe they will not be 100% right in their assessment, but trying to create a curiosity, and then over time, as they learn more and more about the topics, they will also be able to assess themselves in a better way. So not saying that someone is wrong initially, but trying to give them more tools so when they know more about, let's say, business acumen or agile way of working and so on, then they will also be able to know better what they don't know and what they have to develop it. So kind of a journey.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. You don't know what you don't know. And often
Exactly.
with those self-assessments, you sometimes think that you know something much better. And then when you learn it, you realize you didn't know it really at all in the first place. So.
And in some cases, we had skilled, experienced coaches that could also help by giving the participants some sort of feedback on their development areas. And of course, we have a performance development process and so on in the company where you can get feedback from people around you and your manager.
It's actually a nice segue to talk just a little bit around this 6-week leadership program that we ran together. This is one of, I think, 4 streams that we're working on with H&M at the moment. But this was a very specific challenge because it was very soft skills based, and it was actually, to your question, Maida, a little bit around sort of helping people recognize blind spots in their own leadership style and to try to foster greater collaboration across different teams. So we had a very specific challenge that we were working on here. And we've just actually kicked off our 8th cohort of this program. But bringing people through to apply some more theoretical knowledge actually into the workplace, but also to really dig in on, like I said before, those soft skills, like what don't I know, what's important to me, what's important to the team, what's important to people outside my team, how do I influence others without authority, how do I prioritize so that the product and the customer or the user is coming first. And we had some clear sort of, like David said, some clear learning outcomes that we were striving to achieve as part of this program. And I don't want to bog you down in detail on this, but this is essentially what we put those participants through over 6 weeks. These sort of 4 modules based around the Coteam methodology of looking inwards. Who am I? What's important to me? What type of leader am I going to be? Where do I need to grow? Looking outwards, who are the stakeholders that I engage with? How do I practice empathy towards them? How do I actively observe? How do I understand their needs better, their pains and gains? And then looking forwards, getting a bit more into the sort of the agile ways of working and what agile actually means as a concept of a way that a team is, not just what a team does. And this is effectively the design that we put them through, very reflective, exploratory sort of learning journey, not really foundational product owner training in the classic sense, but more trying to equip them with the ability to lead others. And we've put around 250 people through that program. We've had tremendous success there. There's a couple of the student quotes that you can read up on the screen. Very, very satisfying piece of work, I think, for both of us, David, if I'm not mistaken, to really help these people sort of step up to the plate. Product owners and product managers are reasonably new roles. They've only existed for the last decade. They are, there's a very controversial statement that gets thrown around a lot that a product owner is like the CEO of a product, because they do need to exhibit a lot of the similar skills. So really proud to have worked on this together. If you have anything to top up there, David.
No, I think it's a good summary. I think something that we were really liked here was the engagement that we could see.
So we just want to give you a couple of things that we've really learned from this program and from the broader learning journey, just sort of 4 tips to take away with you. David, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, I think this is trying to summarize what I've gone on about for some time now, that really trying to create an interest and a pull from participants. And I'm pretty confident that when we succeed in doing that, they will learn much more than we thought and what we designed sort of in the training.
The second thing I'd say, and you touched on this a little earlier, but getting that buy-in. Every manager that we spoke to was time poor, every participant was time poor, but really helping them understand that they need to time block, that this is important to them, that from the manager's perspective, it's important for them to create the space and the support for them to learn, because otherwise learning can become one of those sort of additional things you're doing off the side of your desk. You're doing it out of office hours or just trying to madly catch up on tasks. And again, that doesn't really instigate behavior change. Our third tip?
Yes, and this is related to sort of doing some kind of learning or training solution as part of an organizational change. I think we were quite lucky that this was seen as a strategic key part of the whole change. So it was on the agenda and given priority from the beginning. And that helped us very much, I think, by sort of there was space for this in this organizational change. Otherwise, it's easy that learning sometimes comes as an afterthought, and then it can be super difficult.
And last but not least, and I think this is probably one of the most important, we can both talk to this point, but at the heart of Agile is test and learn, but also at the heart of these training efforts is test and learn. David, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, we try to live by this. Sometimes we succeeded, sometimes not. But I think one thing I experienced was that whenever we tested something and we didn't see that it worked, it's so hard to back away from something that you have spent energy on and tried to build. But sometimes we dared to take tough decisions and radically change because we saw that it wasn't working the way we had intended it to do. And I think every time we did that, it was the end result was much better. So yeah, that's something I take away from all of this. Try to really, it's difficult to design something that will be ready from day one. So if you have the opportunity to test something, I think that's a much better way to go.
Yeah. And I think in those early cohorts, there was sort of this idea that they had to know everything before they started doing it. And you very quickly pivoted on that.
Yeah, that's true. It was probably a little bit too much happening for some people in the beginning. And maybe it's again, going back to timing, it's probably better than to try your role without any training instead of trying to put in too much and then instead put the training at a later stage when there is sort of time to digest it better.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, David. Hopefully it's been a useful session, probably left you with some food for thought. We will, like I said, we're going to send around like a little tool that really goes into this piece of study that's been done that will give you a checklist of questions. If you're designing a training program and you want to think about maximum effectiveness on that, you'll hopefully be able to use that as a little bit of a guide, also based off our experiences together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll stick around if there's any more questions. I know many of you probably need to run off. Again, really appreciate you joining us and taking time out of your day to be here. Any closing thoughts from you, David?
No, I think I've said enough.
Well, it's been great working together, and I look forward to plenty more.
Yeah, the same.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.